There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They don't announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They slip in quietly, wearing the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, a shared silence, the weight of a weary head finding a place to rest. You don't recognize them as architecture, as the laying of a foundation for everything that comes after. You simply experience them, breathing in the dust of their unremarkable arrival, and only much later, when you look back from a future you could not have imagined, do you see that this was the instant the world tilted on its axis. This was the door, left slightly ajar, through which your entire life would eventually walk. For me, that moment smelled faintly of rain-damp wool and the lavender shampoo Noah always used. It was the moment my best friend fell asleep on my shoulder for the first time, and in the profound stillness of our living room, a silence I had so carefully curated for years was irrevocably, terrifyingly, beautifully broken. We had lived together for 4 years, since our junior year of college, and our friendship was a language spoken in comfortable silences and shared routines. I was the quiet one, the observer who lived more vividly through the lens of my camera than in the chaotic light of the real world. Liam, the photographer, the steady one. That was my role. Noah was the opposite. He was kinetic energy, a force of nature carved from sunshine and easy laughter. A former collegiate swimmer, his body still held the memory of powerful, efficient movement, and he filled every room he entered with a presence that was impossible to ignore. He was the center of gravity in any social circle, while I was the distant planet, content in my own orbit. Our friendship made no sense to anyone on the outside, but to us, it was the most natural thing in the world. He was the anchor that kept me from drifting away into my own quiet abstractions, and I suppose, was the harbor where he could rest, a place where he didn't have to perform, where the tide of expectation could finally go out. I had been in love with him for almost as long as I'd known him, a fact I had buried so deep within myself that it had fossilized, becoming a dense, silent part of my own internal geology. It was a truth I never intended to excavate. Our friendship was too precious, a rare and delicate ecosystem that my feelings, if exposed to the air, would surely poison. He was my best friend, and he was, as far as I and the rest of an oblivious world knew, completely, unassailably straight. It began after Jessica left him. Their breakup wasn't a surprise thunderstorm. It was the slow, agonizing erosion of a coastline. For months, we had lived with the tension, the hushed arguments behind his closed bedroom door, the brittle cheerfulness in the kitchen. Jessica had been a permanent fixture in our lives, a part of the architecture of our little world. I had learned to navigate the specific ache of watching them together, the casual intimacy of her hand on his arm, the way he would look at her with a soft adoration that I both coveted and dreaded. I had perfected the art of the supportive friend, the smiling observer, my camera lens acting as both a tool of my trade and a shield from my heart. I photographed their happiness, cataloged it, and in doing so, placed it at a safe, professional distance. When she finally moved out, she didn't just take her boxes of clothes and books. She took the future Noah had so carefully designed. He was left standing in the echo of an empty room, a blueprint for a life that would now never be built. For the first few weeks, he was a ghost haunting our apartment. The vibrant energy that defined him collapsed inward, leaving a hollow, silent man in its place. He'd go to his job as a software consultant, come home, and disappear into his room. The door, which had always been left wide open in a silent invitation, was now perpetually closed. It was a stark, wooden punctuation mark at the end of a conversation I didn't know how to start. Our other friends tried, of course. They called, they texted, they invited him out for drinks, for games, for anything that might shock his system back to life. They treated his grief like a problem to be solved, a faulty piece of code to be debugged. "You just need to get back out there, man," they'd say, their voices tinny and distant through his phone. He would politely decline, his voice a monotone I barely recognized. He was drowning, and they were all standing on the shore, shouting instructions on how to swim. I took a different approach. I didn't push. I didn't offer advice. I simply existed in the space with him. I made extra food and left a plate for him on the counter. I kept the coffee pot full. I continued my own quiet routines, editing photos late into the night in the living room, the soft click of my mouse a steady, unobtrusive rhythm in the otherwise silent apartment. I was building a container for his grief, a place where it could exist without judgment. One night, I came home late from a shoot to find him sitting on the couch in the dark, the blue light of the television screen flickering across his blank face. He hadn't even turned the volume on. He was just watching the silent, moving pictures, a statue in the gloom. I didn't say a word. I just walked into the kitchen, made 2 cups of tea, and set one on the coffee table in front of him. I sat down in the armchair across from him, the old, worn one that had been my grandfather's, and started sorting through my memory cards. We sat like that for an hour, maybe more, in a silence that was thick with everything he couldn't say. Finally, his voice, rough from disuse, cut through the quiet. "She took the damn waffle iron." I looked up from my laptop. His eyes were fixed on the television, but I knew he wasn't seeing it. "It was a good waffle iron," I said, my voice even. A small, humorless laugh escaped him. It was a brittle sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was a wedding gift from her aunt. He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim, shifting light, I saw the full extent of his exhaustion. His eyes were shadowed, his face drawn. The easy confidence that he wore like a second skin was gone, stripped away, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. "You're the only one," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The only one who doesn't look at me like I'm a project. Like I'm broken." "You're not broken," I said softly. "You're just navigating." It was a photographer's term. Navigating the light, the shadows. It seemed to fit. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw a flicker of the old Noah, a spark of gratitude in the depths of his sadness. "Yeah," he breathed. "Navigating." He fell silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer a chasm between us, but a shared space. A little while later, he stood up and walked to his room, closing the door behind him. But this time, the sound of the latch clicking into place felt different. It felt less like a barrier and more like a breath. It was a few nights after that when the first shift occurred, the moment that became the epicenter of the slow, seismic change that would redefine everything. I was on the couch, where I often worked, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of my life, laptops, hard drives, stacks of photography books. It was past 2 in the morning, the city outside muted to a distant hum. I was lost in the pixels of a landscape shot, adjusting the delicate balance of light and shadow when his bedroom door opened. He stood there, silhouetted in the hallway light, just a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair a mess. He looked lost, like a child who had woken up from a nightmare in an unfamiliar house. "Can't sleep," he mumbled. It wasn't a question or a request, just a statement of fact. I didn't turn around, keeping my eyes on the screen, not wanting to spook him with a direct gaze. "Me neither," I said, my voice deliberately casual. "The witching hour." He walked over and sank onto the other end of the large sectional couch, pulling his knees up to his chest. He didn't say anything else, just sat there, watching the rhythmic movement of my hand on the trackpad. The space between us felt enormous, charged with a strange new energy. For years, we had shared this couch, our legs tangled together while watching movies, his arm thrown casually over the back behind my head. It was a platonic intimacy I had learned to tolerate, to even cherish, because it was all I would ever have. But this was different. This was deliberate. He had sought out my presence in the middle of the night, not for entertainment, but for something else. Something I couldn't name. After a few minutes of silence, he shifted, stretching his long legs out, his foot brushing against my calf. The contact was electric, a tiny spark in the darkness that sent a jolt straight to my chest. I flinched, almost imperceptibly, but he didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't pull away. He just sighed, a long, ragged sound of defeat. And then, he did something that stopped the world. He leaned over, slowly, tentatively, and rested his head on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle locked. My breath caught in my throat. It was the lightest touch, the simple weight of his head, but it felt like a brand. I could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of my t-shirt, the soft tickle of his hair against my neck. I could smell the clean, familiar scent of his shampoo. It was an invasion of my carefully constructed defenses, a breach of a treaty that had been silently in effect for years. My mind, usually a calm sea of observation, became a raging storm. This means nothing. He's grieving. He's exhausted. He's just seeking comfort, the way a dog seeks a warm spot to sleep. This is not for you. Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not, under any circumstances, let him feel how fast your heart is beating. I sat there, a statue carved from anxiety and longing, for what felt like an eternity. I stared at my laptop screen, the glowing pixels blurring into an abstract painting of color and light. I tried to focus on the image, on the technical details of aperture and exposure, but it was useless. My entire consciousness had collapsed into that single point of contact on my shoulder. I could hear his breathing, shallow at first, then gradually deepening, evening out. The tension in his body seemed to melt away, and his weight settled more heavily against me. He was falling asleep. He was falling asleep on me. A wave of profound, aching tenderness washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. This was Noah, my Noah, broken and hurting and seeking refuge in me. The analytical part of my brain, the part that kept me safe, screamed warnings. It told me to gently shrug him off, to suggest he go to his own bed. But my heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, whispered something else. It told me to stay, to be still, to be the harbor he needed. And so I did. I sat there, motionless, long after my own screen went to sleep, long after the city outside fell completely silent. I sat there with the impossible weight of my best friend's head on my shoulder, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing, and understood, with a terrifying clarity, that the world had changed. The door had been opened, and I was far too weak to ever close it again. Before the night he first fell asleep on my shoulder, our friendship was a well-documented landscape. I could trace its topography in my memory, in the thousands of photographs I had taken over the years. We met in a crowded lecture hall during our freshman year of college. I was tucked away in the back corner, trying to make myself as small as possible, a tactic I had perfected over a lifetime of feeling slightly out of sync with the world. He was in the front row, of course, already the center of a laughing, easygoing group. He was on the swim team, and he had the kind of casual, sun-bleached confidence that seemed both impossibly magnetic and utterly intimidating to someone like me. I never expected our orbits to cross, but they did, in the university's darkroom. I was a photography major, and that small, chemical-smelling sanctuary was my real home on campus. I was printing a series of black and white portraits, studies of light and shadow on the faces of strangers, when he walked in. He was there for a mandatory elective, a basic intro to photography class that most of the athletes took for an easy grade. He looked completely out of place, his broad shoulders seeming to shrink the already cramped room. He fumbled with the enlarger, his large, capable hands suddenly clumsy and uncertain. I watched him from the corner of my eye, expecting him to get frustrated and leave, but he didn't. He kept trying, a small frown of concentration on his face. Eventually, I took pity on him. I walked over, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your negative is upside down." He jumped, startled, and then a slow grin spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen it up close. It was dazzling. "Oh, right. Thanks, man." I showed him how to align it properly, how to manage the exposure time, how to slip the blank paper into the developer tray. He watched, fascinated, as the image slowly materialized in the chemical bath, a ghost appearing from the ether. "Whoa," he breathed. "That's like magic." His genuine wonder was disarming. He wasn't trying to be cool or detached. He was simply, purely impressed. That was the first thread. We started talking after that. He would ask me about my work, his questions surprisingly insightful. He didn't just see a picture. He saw the composition, the emotion, the story I was trying to tell. He had an artist's eye trapped in a swimmer's body. He started seeking me out, sitting with me in the dining hall, pulling me into his circle of friends who looked at me with a sort of baffled curiosity. I was an anomaly, a quiet, artsy satellite pulled into the orbit of their sun. But Noah made it clear I belonged. He'd sling an arm around my shoulder and say, "This is Liam. He's a genius. He makes magic in a dark room." His casual, unquestioning acceptance was a balm to a part of me I hadn't even realized was wounded. The moment I knew I loved him wasn't a lightning strike. It was more like the slow development of a photograph, an image gradually emerging from a formless gray. It was in the small moments. The time he showed up at my dorm room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee at 3 in the morning because he knew I was pulling an all-nighter to finish a project. The way he would always save me a seat, even when I was late. The afternoon he found me looking at a rejection letter from a prestigious photo contest, my face a mask of disappointment. He didn't say, "It's okay," or "There will be other chances." He just sat down next to me, read the letter over my shoulder, and said, "Their loss. They're blind." He believed in me with a fierce, uncomplicated loyalty that I had never experienced before. He saw me, not the quiet, awkward kid, but the artist, the person I hoped to be. And in the light of his belief, I began to see myself differently, too. We became roommates our junior year, a decision that felt both exhilarating and incredibly dangerous. Living with him meant a constant, low-level hum of awareness. I became a scholar of his habits, the way he left his wet towel on the floor, the sound of him humming off-key in the shower, the particular way the morning light caught the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. My love for him became the ambient noise of my life, a constant frequency just below the range of normal hearing. I learned to live with it, to function around it. Seeing him with his girlfriends was the hardest part. Each one was a fresh lesson in self-restraint. I would smile, be friendly, and retreat to my darkroom, where I could channel the ache into my work, creating images full of stark contrast and unspoken longing. I convinced myself that this was enough, that our friendship, this incredible, life-affirming bond, was more than I ever had a right to expect. Risking it for a feeling he could never return would be the height of selfish stupidity. And so I built my walls, brick by careful brick, and learned to live peacefully within them, a quiet observer of a life I could be near, but never truly a part of. The breakup with Jessica was the catalyst that changed the emotional chemistry of our home. It wasn't just that Noah was sad. It was that the fundamental structure of his life had dissolved. He had always been a planner, a man with a 5-year plan and a 10-year goal. Jessica was the centerpiece of that architecture. Without her, he was adrift in an open, featureless sea. His loneliness was a palpable thing, a third presence in our apartment. It sat with him in his closed-off room. It followed him into the kitchen when he'd stare blankly into the open refrigerator. He stopped smiling. That was the thing that gutted me the most. Noah's smile was a force of nature, a thing of pure, unadulterated joy that could light up a room. I realized, with a pang of clarity, that he was the only one who had ever truly paid attention to my own smiles, which were rare and fleeting things. He'd always notice. "There it is," he'd say, nudging me. "Knew I could get one out of you now." His own smile was gone, and I felt its absence like a physical wound. I was the only one who seemed to notice the depth of its loss, the profound emptiness it left behind. His turning to me was a process of elimination. His other friends, the loud and boisterous group from his swimming days, were ill-equipped to handle this version of Noah. They wanted the fun, easygoing guy, and they didn't know what to do with the quiet, grieving man who had taken his place. They offered distractions, not solace. I offered nothing but my presence. And in the vast, echoing space of his grief, my quiet stillness became a form of gravity. It was something solid to hold on to. He started leaving his bedroom door open again, just a crack at first, as if testing the air. Then he started migrating, spending his evenings in the living room, not talking, just coexisting while I worked. He was a ship, battered by a storm, seeking a quiet port. And I, fool that I was, lit every beacon and prayed he would steer his way toward me, even as I knew the danger of letting such a vessel dock in my fragile harbor. The night he laid his head on my shoulder, it was more than just a gesture of exhaustion. It was an act of surrender. He was giving me his weariness, his sadness, his vulnerability. He was trusting me to hold it. And in that moment, I knew I would let myself be crushed under its weight before I would ever let him go. That first night established the new ritual. It was a silent, unspoken agreement. Around midnight, or sometimes later, Noah would emerge from his room, a ghost in the dim light of my laptop screen. He would come to the couch, sometimes with a blanket, and settle in at the far end. For a while, he would just sit there, a silent sentinel in the periphery of my vision. I would pretend to be absorbed in my work, my focus absolute, even as every nerve ending in my body was screamingly aware of his presence. The air would thicken, charged with a quiet anticipation that was almost unbearable. Then, slowly, as if pulled by an invisible tide, he would drift closer. He would lie down, stretching his long frame along the length of the couch, and after a few moments of feigned restlessness, he would find his place, his head resting on my lap, or his body curled up against my side, his arm draped across my stomach. The first few times, my body betrayed me with its tension. I would sit ramrod straight, my muscles locked, terrified that the frantic, thunderous beating of my heart would be audible in the quiet room. I was certain he could feel the tremor in my hands, the slight hitch in my breathing. But he never gave any sign that he noticed. He would simply sigh, a sound of profound release, and let the current of sleep pull him under. It was an act of such complete and terrifying trust. He was making himself utterly vulnerable to me, and he had no idea of the power he was handing over. He had no idea that my entire world had been reconfigured to revolve around these stolen hours in the dark. My work became a pretense, a shield. I would sit with my laptop balanced on my knees, my fingers hovering over the trackpad, but I wasn't editing photos. I was cataloging a different set of details. The way his hair felt against my jeans, soft and fine. The subtle scent of his skin, a warm, clean smell that was uniquely his. The pattern of his breathing, how it would start shallow and then deepen into the slow, even rhythm of true sleep. I learned the cartography of his sleeping form, the way his left eyebrow would twitch in a dream, the slight, guttural snore that would escape him when he was completely relaxed, the surprising weight of his hand resting on my chest. I was a cartographer of intimacy, mapping a territory I had no right to explore, yet one I was now inhabiting every single night. This new ritual was a delicate, dangerous ecosystem built on a foundation of plausible deniability. For him, it was simple. He was heartbroken and couldn't sleep alone. His best friend was a comforting, stable presence. It was practical. It was platonic. For me, it was a slow, exquisite torture. It was everything I had ever wanted, delivered in a form I couldn't acknowledge. Each night was a battle fought within the confines of my own mind. One part of me, the pragmatic, self-protective part, screamed that this was temporary. It was a symptom of his grief, a crutch he would discard as soon as he was strong enough to walk on his own again. This part warned me not to read anything into it, not to build a home in this temporary shelter, because the eviction, when it came, would be devastating. But another part of me, the hopeful, foolish, romantic part, began to whisper a different story. It pointed to the subtle shifts, the small escalations. It started with his head on my shoulder, then my lap. Then he started seeking more contact. He would maneuver himself until he was pressed against my side, his arm thrown over my waist, as if to anchor himself. One night, he shifted in his sleep and his hand found mine, his fingers loosely intertwining with my own. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest. I expected him to pull away, even in sleep, but he didn't. His grip tightened slightly, a moment of unconscious possession that sent a wildfire tearing through my veins. I lay awake for hours that night, his hand in mine, studying the way our fingers fit together, a perfect, impossible geometry. I was living in a dream, and I was terrified of waking up. The days were a strange counterpoint to the nights. In the light of day, we would revert to our old roles, but with a new, unspoken awareness humming beneath the surface. We'd talk about work, about groceries, about bills. But the easy, unthinking physical contact of our old friendship was gone, replaced by a careful, deliberate dance of proximity. We were hyper-aware of each other. A casual brush of our arms in the hallway felt charged with a new significance. I would watch him across the kitchen island as he made coffee, and he would look up and catch my eye, and for a split second, the memory of the previous night, of his body curled against mine, would flash between us. Then one of us would look away, a silent acknowledgement that we had entered a space for which there were no maps. I used my camera to try and make sense of it. I started taking pictures of him again, but not the posed, smiling photos of before. These were quiet, stolen moments. Noah asleep on the couch, the morning light tracing the line of his jaw. Noah staring out the window, lost in thought, his reflection a ghostly double in the glass. The empty space on the couch where he had been lying just moments before, the indent in the cushion still holding the shape of him. My photography had always been about finding the story in the light and shadows, and now, the story I was telling was one of longing, of intimacy, of a love that could only exist in the liminal space between dusk and dawn. The images were beautiful, and they were heartbreaking. They were the truest things I had ever created. The ritual continued for weeks, stretching into a month, then two. It became our new normal, this strange, nocturnal life we lived together. His grief began to recede, the sharp edges softening. I saw glimpses of the old Noah returning, a flash of his real smile, a genuine laugh at something on television. And with his healing came a new, sharper kind of fear for me. I had become his sanctuary, his place of comfort. What would happen when he no longer needed one? The thought was a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Every night when he came to the couch, I would feel a surge of both relief and anxiety. Relief that it was happening again. Anxiety that this would be the last time. I was living on borrowed time, in a borrowed intimacy, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was going to destroy me when it ended. But I was powerless to stop it. I was addicted to the solace and the pain of it, to the quiet, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just about comfort for him, either. The night of the storm, the air itself felt different. It was late autumn, and a fierce, angry weather system had rolled in, trapping the city in its grip. Wind howled against our apartment windows, and rain lashed down in furious, horizontal sheets. The power had been flickering for hours, casting the room in a strobe of electric light and sudden, profound darkness. We were marooned, the two of us, on our couch island, the sounds of the storm creating a roaring, intimate cocoon around us. Noah hadn't been asleep. For hours, we had been lying there, tangled together in our usual configuration, him tucked against my side, his head on my chest. But his breathing was too even, his body too still for sleep. He was awake, and I was awake, and the silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was a taut, vibrating wire, stretched to its breaking point. He was tracing patterns on my arm with his fingertip, idle, looping circles that sent shivers across my skin. I watched his hand, the way his fingers moved with a slow, deliberate grace. The laptop was closed, forgotten on the floor. The only light came from the streetlights outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The entire world had been reduced to the space of this couch, to the sound of the rain, to the feeling of his touch. I could feel his heart beating against my ribs, a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to my own frantic pulse. The air was so thick with unspoken words that I felt like I was suffocating. Something had to give. The tension was a living thing, a third presence in the room with us. His hand still on my arm. He lifted his head slightly, propping himself up on his elbow to look at me. His face was close, so close I could see the individual lashes framing his eyes, the way the dim light caught in their hazel depths. He looked serious, his expression stripped of all pretense. He looked scared. My own fear was a cold, solid weight in my stomach. This is it, I thought. This is the end. He's going to say this has to stop. He's going to put the walls back up. I braced myself for the impact. Liam. His voice was a whisper, barely audible over the roar of the wind. I couldn't form words. My throat was too tight. I managed a small, questioning hum, a pathetic sound in the face of the monumental thing that was happening between us. He held my gaze, his own eyes searching mine for something I couldn't identify. He looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, debating whether or not to jump. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. "Can I ask you something?" "Stupid?" He finally managed, his voice strained. I swallowed, finding my voice. It came out as a croak. "Anything." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before plunging into cold water. His eyes never left mine. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of the rain fading to a distant rush. "Would it be okay?" he began, his voice dropping even lower, so low it was almost a thought instead of a sound. He hesitated, the seconds stretching into an eternity. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question hung in the air between us, fragile and luminous. It wasn't a proposition. It wasn't a joke. It was a plea. It was a confession. It was the most terrifying and beautiful question I had ever heard. My heart didn't stop. It exploded. It shattered into a million pieces and sent them shooting through my veins like stars. The carefully constructed walls I had spent years building, the fortress of self-preservation, crumbled to dust in an instant. All the warnings, all the fears, all the sensible reasons to say no, to protect myself, to protect our friendship, they all evaporated. In that moment, there was only him, his face inches from mine, his eyes full of a raw, terrifying vulnerability that mirrored my own. I couldn't speak. The words were trapped somewhere behind the supernova in my chest. So I did the only thing I could. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the barest of movements, but it was enough. It was everything. He leaned in, his movement agonizingly slow, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to stop him. I didn't. I met him halfway, and then his lips were on mine. The kiss was nothing like I had ever imagined. It wasn't passionate or demanding. It was tentative. It was soft. It was a question asked in a different language. It was the taste of rain and salt, and a fear so profound it felt like reverence. It was just a gentle pressure, a moment of stillness where the storm outside and the storm inside me finally fell silent. For that one, perfect, infinite second, there was only a quiet, breathtaking peace. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, and in the dark, in the shelter of the storm, I felt something I had long ago given up on ever feeling. I felt found. The moment broke as gently as it had begun. He pulled back, his lips parting from mine with a soft, hesitant sound. We stayed there for a heartbeat, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air. His eyes were wide, searching mine, and what I saw in them was not relief or joy, but a dawning, overwhelming panic. The vulnerability that had been so beautiful a second before was curdling into fear. The color drained from his face. He scrambled backward, disentangling himself from me so quickly he almost fell off the couch. The warmth of his body was gone, and a sudden, shocking cold rushed in to fill the space. I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice tight with a new, sharp anxiety. He wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the wall, on anything but my face. "I shouldn't have. I don't know what. I'm a mess." He was shaking his head, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frantic self-recrimination. He was erasing it. He was trying to undo the most honest moment of my life as it was still echoing in the air. Before I could find my voice, before I could say his name, before I could tell him it was okay, he was on his feet. He fled. He didn't just walk to his room. He fled, a man escaping the scene of a crime. He pulled his bedroom door shut behind him, and the click of the latch was the loudest, most violent sound I had ever heard. It was a gunshot in the silence. It was the sound of a drawbridge being raised, of a portcullis crashing down. The door, which had for months been a symbol of his openness, of his need for me, was now a solid, impenetrable barrier. And I was on the wrong side of it. I sat there on the couch, frozen in the wreckage. The spot where he had been lying was still warm. I could still feel the ghost of his lips on mine. The storm raged on outside, but the silence inside the apartment was a new, suffocating thing. It was absolute. The ritual was broken. The unspoken language we had developed was dead. He had crossed a line I had dreamed of him crossing for years, and then he had recoiled in horror, leaving me alone with the consequences. The next few days were a special kind of hell. It was a world of polite, excruciating distance. Noah moved through our shared spaces like a stranger. He would leave for work before I was awake and come home late, going straight to his room. When we did cross paths in the kitchen or the hallway, he would offer a tight, small smile that didn't reach his eyes and mutter a hey, before finding a reason to be somewhere else. He was avoiding me, but he was doing it with the practiced, painful courtesy reserved for people you wish you didn't have to see every day. The couch remained empty at night. The living room, which had become my nocturnal sanctuary, now felt vast and barren, haunted by the ghost of an intimacy that had been offered and then violently rescinded. My mind became my own personal torture chamber. I replayed the kiss, the question, the panic, on an endless loop. Every time, I came to the same devastating conclusion. I had misread everything. It wasn't a confession. It was a moment of profound confusion and grief-fueled madness. He had been looking for comfort, any comfort, and in his desperation, he had made a mistake. He had used me, not maliciously, but carelessly, and now he was ashamed and regretful. The friendship, the one thing I had sworn to protect at all costs, was fractured, perhaps irreparably. The pain of it was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The yearning I had lived with for years was nothing compared to this new, sharper agony of having something real in my grasp for a single second, only to have it dissolve into smoke. The silence was killing me. The not knowing was infinitely worse than a clean rejection. After 3 days of this silent torment, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I needed to hear the words, even if they were the ones I dreaded most. I needed the finality of it. That evening, I saw the light on under his door. I walked down the short hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave it alone, to let time smooth over the awkwardness. But I knew it wouldn't. This wasn't a crack that could be patched over. It was a foundational fracture. It had to be addressed. I raised my hand and knocked on the closed door. The sound was timid, but it felt like a cannon blast in the quiet apartment. There was a long pause. I heard a rustling sound from within. Yeah. His voice was muffled, hesitant. Noah, it's me, I said, my own voice unsteady. Can we please talk? Another silence stretched, so long I thought he was going to say no. Finally, I heard the soft click of the lock, and the door opened a few inches. He stood there, looking as exhausted and miserable as I felt. He didn't meet my eyes. He just stepped back, a silent invitation to enter the room that had become his fortress. I walked in, and he closed the door behind me, shutting us in together. He sat on the edge of his bed, his shoulders slumped, and stared at his hands. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling awkward and out of place. I didn't know where to start, so I started with the truth. This, I said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us, this silence. I can't do it. It's killing me. He still wouldn't look at me. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry, don't be sorry, I said, a new wave of desperation making my voice stronger. Just be honest. Please. Noah, look at me, he flinched, but after a long moment, he slowly raised his head, and his tired, hazel eyes finally met mine. I saw the conflict there, the fear, the confusion. That night, I continued, my voice softening. If it was a mistake, just tell me. If you regret it, just say the words. I can handle it. I swear I can. I can go back to being your friend. We can pretend it never happened. But I need you to tell me. Because this not knowing. It's 100 times worse. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He swiped it away angrily. What if I don't know? He said, his voice cracking. What if I don't know if it was a mistake? That's the problem, Liam. I don't know what it was. He finally broke, the words spilling out of him in a torrent of confused, frustrated emotion. All I know is that for the past 2 months, since she left, you've been the only thing that felt real. The only thing that made sense. Coming out to the couch at night, being near you. It was the only time the noise in my head stopped. It was the only place I could actually breathe. He stood up and began to pace the small room, his kinetic energy returning, but now it was frantic, anxious. And then, it started to change. It stopped being just about feeling safe. I'd lie there, and I'd be so aware of you, of your breathing, of the way you smelled, of the warmth of your hand. And I wanted more. I wanted to be closer. And that night, with the storm, I looked at you, and all I could think about was what it would be like to kiss you. So I did. And for 1 second it was the calmest I've felt in my entire life. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face a mask of anguish. And then I realized what I'd done. And it terrified me. It still terrifies me. He threw his hands up in a gesture of helplessness. What does this mean? I'm not. I've only ever been with women. I love Jessica. What is this? Who am I? His confession, his raw, unvarnished confusion, washed over me. The anger, the hurt I had been nursing for days, dissolved, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost buckled my knees. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself, from a feeling that threatened his entire understanding of who he was. He was just as lost as I was. I closed the distance between us, slowly, so he wouldn't bolt. I stopped a foot in front of him. Hey, I said softly, waiting until he met my eyes again. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We don't have to put a label on it. I took a breath, gathering all my courage, and reached out, my hand hovering in the space between us for a second before I gently took his. His skin was cold, but he didn't pull away. His fingers curled around mine, a desperate, uncertain grip. I said, my voice thick with emotion, we just have to stop being so scared of it. Of this, he stared down at our joined hands, at the way my fingers fit between his. He looked from our hands to my face, his eyes searching mine. The frantic energy seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. I don't know how, he whispered. You don't have to, I said. We can learn together. We stood like that for a long time, holding hands in the middle of his room, the silence no longer an enemy, but a space for healing. We talked for hours that night, not about labels or futures, but about feelings, about the loneliness, the fear, the confusion, the strange, magnetic pull that had grown between us in the dark. We laid all our cards on the table, all the unspoken thoughts and secret fears. It was the most honest conversation of my life. The ambiguity that had been both a comfort and a torment was finally cleared away, replaced by a fragile, tentative, breathtaking honesty. Much later, when we were both exhausted from the emotional weight of it all, a comfortable quiet settled over us. He was sitting on the bed again, and I was on the floor, leaning against it, his knee pressed against my shoulder. I'm still scared, he admitted into the darkness. Me too, I said. And it was true. But it was a different kind of fear now. It wasn't the fear of rejection or loss. It was the fear that comes with standing at the beginning of something new and important, the fear of getting it wrong. It was a fear that was twinned with a soaring, brilliant hope. When it was time for me to go, I stood up, and for a moment, the old awkwardness threatened to return. I started to head for the door, to retreat to my own room, to fall back into our old patterns. But Noah's voice stopped me. Liam. I turned. He was looking at me, his expression open and vulnerable. Stay, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple, quiet request. I walked back to his bed. He moved over, pulling back the covers. I hesitated for only a second before sliding in beside him. It felt different from the couch. There was no pretense here, no plausible deniability. This was an intentional choice, a conscious act of togetherness. He turned off the lamp on his nightstand, plunging the room into a soft darkness. He turned on his side to face me, and I did the same. In the faint light filtering through the window, I could just make out the shape of his face. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers warm against my skin. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I whispered back. He moved closer until his forehead was resting against mine. He didn't kiss me. He just breathed, and I breathed with him. We fell asleep like that, tangled together in the quiet dark, the closed door no longer a barrier between us, but a boundary drawn around our new, fragile world. The next morning, I woke up first. The light filtering through the blinds was soft and gray. Noah was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in months. His arm was thrown possessively over my waist, his hand resting on the small of my back. I lay there, motionless, simply watching him breathe. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years was gone. In its place was a profound, quiet calm, a feeling of rightness that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't a dream. This was real. I carefully slipped out of bed and went into the kitchen. I started making coffee, the familiar, mundane ritual feeling new and sacred. The whole apartment felt different, lighter. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, his hair a mess, blinking against the light. He gave me a small, shy smile. "Morning," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my own smile feeling more natural than it had in years. He walked over to me, and instead of going to the cupboard for a mug, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He nuzzled his face into my neck, his morning stubble scratching gently against my skin. He just held me, his body warm and solid against mine, as I poured the coffee. No words were needed. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet of the morning, finding a new language in the simple act of holding on. We didn't solve everything in a day. There were still moments of hesitation, flashes of fear in his eyes when things felt too real. There were conversations yet to be had with friends and family, a new identity for him to navigate and understand. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning. A real, complicated, and sometimes scary beginning. But we were facing it together. The foundation of our friendship, that deep, unshakable bedrock of trust and affection, became the foundation for something new, something more. There are moments in your life that are doors. For years, I had stood on one side of a door, looking at the life I wanted, convinced it was locked forever. But I was wrong. The door was never locked. It was just waiting. It was waiting for a quiet night, for a desperate need for comfort, for the courage of a terrified man to ask a stupid question, and for the courage of another to nod yes. It turns out, the most profound changes don't begin when you knock down a door. They begin when you find the one person who makes you feel safe enough to simply turn the handle, walk through, and begin to build a new room, a new life, in the beautiful, honest silence you've learned to create together.